Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about how entrenched the globalist conspiracy is in place. How strong it is, really. Go back in history. You think people were stupid way back when in 1913 or 1914 or 1920s? Hell no. They're much more independent than they are today and more wide awake, probably, too. And the effects of government and Big Brother weren't upon them as anywhere near like it could be today, because you just go out west, that type of deal. But, just think about some of the presidents we had, like Calvin Coolidge, for instance, and Warren Harding. Warren Harding came first in 1920, actually inaugurated in 1921. That was a time when they got, after World War I, the greatest war of all time, that people were upset about, so they wanted to return to an age of normalcy. So, look at the policies of Warren Harding. First off, he wouldn't have anything to do with the Treaty of Versailles, period. I mean, the League of Nations, or the Treaty of Versailles. Actually, he signed separate treaties, separate peace treaties with Germany. And he also never recognized the Bolshevik government in Russia. In other words, the revolution that occurred in 1917 in Russia, he said that was not the legitimate government. He did not recognize it. Now, what's interesting is the people he ran against, and he won by a landslide. Warren Harding won by a landslide in 1920. It was the Democratic Party member was Cox, C-O-X, and the vice president was FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, what's interesting about that, you look at all the policies that were in place for all the years in the 20s, up until the time that FDR became president, they all got reversed. One of the first things that FDR did was to recognize the Bolshevik government in Russia as a legitimate government. He used to call Uncle Stalin, Joseph Stalin, Uncle Joe Stalin. He was a nice guy, and basically even supported him and built him up militarily by sending even $100 printing plates over there so they can print all the money they want and buy what they want on the international market. So I got to say this, when you're trying to wake people up, you're going to need a lot more to do a lot more than that. Actually, we have to have a counterattack, and that's going to be something I'm not sure what it's going to be exactly, but just think about this. The forces that were in place that push for globalism, they're relentless. They never give up. They never sleep. Warren Harding probably, in my mind, he probably was murdered, maybe. He might have had a heart attack, he might have had a stroke, but then again, in 1923, when he died in office, it came as a surprise, basically. He was buried right away. He was embalmed right away. They did no autopsy on him. And then Calvin Coolidge, basically, but he carried out the same type of policies as Warren Harding. So, that was a problem for the globalists, a major problem. You got to remember, the globalist candidate that they were using before this was Woodrow Wilson, who was elected in 1912, okay, inaugurated in 1913. And basically the only way they got him to get in office was to split the vote between Taft, who was the president at the time, and he was going to veto everything with the Federal Reserve, and Teddy Roosevelt. So on the Bull Moose Party. That was how they got Woodrow Wilson in office. So, in other words, even though he was a minority popular vote, I think, at the time, or he wasn't that popular, and he never really held any office. He was actually the president of Princeton University, I believe, and New Jersey, and he was New Jersey governor for maybe a couple years. I don't think he even finished out his term, and then all of a sudden he ran for president. So, basically the guy was in the hip pocket of Bernard Baruch. So if you look up his name, you'll see what's going on. But Woodrow Wilson was used by the globalists, and actually figured it out after a period of time. And actually at the end of his second term, he was so deathly ill and out of his, I don't know, he might have got poisoned, for all I know. The guy might have got poisoned, I don't know. There's crazier shit that goes on than you can believe, and it's been going on for ages. That's what I gotta say, and that's really my point of this. A lot of stuff's been going on for ages. What you really need is a good counterattack. And it's almost like you know, it's not good enough to be independent. It's not good enough to have silver and gold and whatever the hell it is, have your own food. You know, and it's not just good enough to be an extruder. The people that are pulling this bullshit by trying to push the United States into a globalist type policy that are run by the elite, they need to be like, they're enemies. They're traitors. I mean, really, we need to actually start getting some kind of committees together to see what these people are really about, investigate them, and the laws of the nation say they're traitors. And you know what you do with traitors? You waste them. It's about all there is to it. And, you know, it's like, you know, it's not good enough just to be like, oh, it can't affect me now and all this kind of shit, because it will affect you. And it isn't good enough even if it doesn't affect you, because you got to help other people. That's the way I look at it. You got to keep the thing rolling for everybody. That's the way it goes. What comes around goes around. So do the right thing all the time. But if you look back in the 20s, it looked like the whole pendulum swung from the globalist policy, World War I, and you know the League of Nations, which failed, and it looked like everything was swinging the other way. They went to supposed isolationism, but it was like independent nation. The government got cut by 50% under Warren Harding, and Calvin Coolidge kept it trim very much. And when Herbert Hoover came in, he was going to do the same type of thing. Now Calvin Coolidge just decided not to run for second term, you know. So if he ran for the second term, he would have been stuck holding the bag, but it turned out to be Herbert Hoover. Actually, that guy was a good guy, to tell you the truth. There was a lot of stuff, humanitarian stuff he did. He got caught holding the bag. So guaranteed that he'd lose the election due to the economy crashing and the stock market crashing and everything. And then you got FDR. FDR, who ran against Warren Harding in 1920 on the vice president side of the ticket. All of a sudden he reverses everything that happened in the 1920s, going back to the age of normalcy. That guy was a socialist to the max, communist to the max, and a communist corroborator. That's my opinion on FDR. I got no freaking opinion. I got no good opinion about him. I know he's a popular guy, but you know, to tell you the truth, Warren Harding won 61% of the vote. It was a landslide. He clobbered the socialist opposition. He clobbered them. You know, so I mean, a lot of people knew what the hell was going on. Problem is, you know, if you look back in history today, it makes it look like, you know, Warren Harding and Coolidge didn't do anything. They were in with the big business. They were Republic. They weren't in with big business. They were in with laissez-faire capitalism. They were keeping the hands of the government off of business. And in other words, it was free enterprise. That's what they were about. They weren't about big business. That was the thing. It's real big business. It's actually behind a lot of the socialism. Big time. That's what the elite is. And that's who was behind FDR. I just want to point this out because people looking at stuff today, they're thinking somehow it's different. It ain't different, man. It ain't different for shit. It's the same old garbage. And people way back when, well, way back when, was it 90-something years ago, or 80 years ago, whatever, you know, depending if you're talking in the 20s or 30s, people knew what was going on, you know? A lot of people knew what goes on. They couldn't do shit about it. So, I say this, though. The only way you're actually going to nail the elite is you just can't win an election. The elite that are screwing up the country and actually doing all these things against the people, they actually need to be, you know, investigated, sorted out, and executed, you know, per law, per the Constitution of the United States. That's what happens with traitors. So, I don't know if this might be a controversial video, but I'm telling you right now, it's this, you know, it's us against them, basically. And, you know, they're a lot shrewder than you think. So, you got to keep the pressure on. And when you think you're winning and you think you're just electing somebody that's going to be in office and go, it's all solved, that ain't good enough. You actually got to root out the evil and get rid of it. That's really what's got to happen.